Hey, welcome back to Metropole Grid. My name is Andrej.
And my name is Jeff.
And Jeff, thanks so much for joining. This is round 3 of NANPC Montréal. We are 3 rounds into Swiss. This is basically top table. Both of these players are undefeated, and we're in for quite a match. Firstly, Jeff, shout out for joining me. For those who don't know, you Sangren SC, channel's linked below. You do video stuff, you do streaming, also head of Null Signal Games Organized Play. How's it going, man?
It's good. It's pretty busy at time of recording. There's a lot of world stuff happening right now and planning and prep, and starting to get to the real crunch time for that. But it's been very exciting, and just put in an order for all of the new prizes this year for Worlds, or all of the new cards. So that's a lot of fun.
You can find all that card stuff up on Null Signal Games. The prize support this year is incredible. Again, check out Null Signal Games for more information about that. October 18th to 20th. Oh, we have 2 players here. Mind you, you came up to Montreal. You played in NANPC Montreal. We're going to see you on screen in, I think, a couple rounds.
Yeah. I had a pretty lucky and nice performing day. And here we're also going to get to see one of my teammates, AgInfusion here on the right, playing Riel Kit Peddler. And Antoine, someone who I got to play in, I think, the penultimate round of Swiss, got playing AgInfusion on the left over here. Looks like neither player took a mulligan, and I think maybe there's some time on the round shenanigans starting here. But
yeah, they seem to be happy with what they have. So Chris drove up from, I believe, New York. You can see that Snare Bears bracelet there. He's been playing this kit deck, I think, for a minute. Mind you, I think the last performance I saw at NANPC Boston, he was on some Hoshiko, but this should be a relatively good matchup, I think, for Kit. Again, you have those 2 big breakers, the Wolf and the Whale, the Lobisomia and the Orca, and AgInfusion does have some big ice. What do you think about this matchup? What side would you rather be on?
This is an interesting one. I think probably the Kit, because so much of your game plan is just like, hey, I can get 2 icebreakers down and break every single ice in the game for about 4 credits. And then I just have lots of ways to make 4 credits over and over and over again. But it's not going to be a cakewalk. Glacier is a tricky thing. Here we see, an interesting punishment. Antoine making, I think, a pretty reasonable decision to leave HQ open. And Chris happens to have the burner trigger here. Resolving the 3 cards out of the hand, getting to see, and I think it'll be interesting to see what we have. So, Border Control, Lacosta, and Tatubola all pulled. So what are you?
I really like this. It slows down the corporation. It was very obvious that we want to push something into the remote server. And Chris does here what a lot of people don't do, is putting cards on top of the deck. And I think cards on top of the deck is sick. It just basically slows the corporation down. Their next couple turns of mandatory draw, they're just drawing into what they had, and that slows the game down. And for, a deck that wants to get up big breakers and has a relatively steady economy, you don't mind slowing the game down.
Yeah, and one thing you'll note here, Chris is not clicking to draw, which maybe seems a little bit weird.
Yes.
And the reason is he's holding the Spark of Inspiration in his hand already, so he wants to avoid accidentally drawing the Lobisome, and so just clicking for credits is totally fine here. He also knows that the Corp is not actually making any tempo forward moves, so he might have the ability to just click for credits for multiple turns and still be in a winning position.
Now we're going to read down the deck. This is the Spark of Inspiration. We're going to rip cards until we find our first program. And I think it might just be a full 50-50 here, whether you get the big Wolf or the big Whale. You'd rather have the Wolf first, and it looks like we nailed it. Lobisomia coming down. What a card, mind you, from Rebellion Without Rehearsal, the last big Shaper set. And this thing is giving Kit just the best end of a year that I think Kit could have hoped for. This thing will rip through just about everything, barring some barriers later on can get a bit taxing. And Jinteki decks have a lot of good barriers. Those power counters can be challenged over a medium to long game.
Kit tends to make it pretty difficult to challenge, especially with the second breaker being Orca. It does mean that if the way for Jinteki to tax out the Lobisome is to basically res exclusively barriers against this deck. And while there are a lot of good barriers, you kind of have to be running, it's a little bit unusual to be running quite enough of those to fully do a tax out here.
Well, we saw too back on top of the deck, right, with the burners. So that's the Tattoo Bowl and the Border Control, both really great barriers. And they're not expensive to break. It's more so about those power counters. Now, we did mention this is Kit, and Kit says the first time a turn you encounter a piece of ice, it's a code gate. So you can use Lobisomia to break the code gate and charge itself. So it's about making that one good run a turn to charge, and we'll see how many Botus and Bronze Antoine can res.
Yep. So Antoine's just installing a card in the remote and then taking 2 more credits here. Now Chris is basically trying to decide, is that the Lacosta that he'd burnered back on top? It is the right turn, I believe, for that Lacosta to have been drawn. Yep. But, do you check it, or do you think this is a a Rashida, and it's probably not a Rashida. I think Chris is probably pretty safe to say, yeah, that is almost certainly the Lacosta there. So has lots of potential leverage here to just keep building up a board state, because I think he feels like he's not going to get locked out if this game keeps going long.
Mystic Miami coming down, I think, turn 3. That's going to give just a bucket of money over 1 credit a turn at a minimum. And we're charging it again. You said Lacosta. Antoine really put an ice down on the table turn 1, leaving HQ open. Clearly, he wanted to jam something. And this deck very early, the best thing you can get going is, well, it is a Lacosta. You're generally looking for a Lacosta on top of a Charlotte Cassador. That's what you really want there. But spending the overclock credits to trade down for a Lacosta, you're feeling pretty okay about that.
Yeah, I think as the runner, you're actually quite happy. If the deck doesn't have Lacosta, it's just so much slower and more expensive for it to make a lot of forward progress. So I think that's a pretty good exchange of an overclock for a Lacosta.
Now, we talked a lot about Chris, and this kit deck has a lot of exciting cards, mind you. They're coming up face up, so they're easy to talk about. But Antoine, mind you, he's been playing Netrunner for a long time. He used to be playing, when I started playing, he was just a teenager coming into events with his dad. And now he's, obviously, we're like 7-8 years later. He is playing, I don't think his dad plays so much more, and he's playing really high skill Netrunner. This is AgInfusion. We haven't talked about identity, for those who might know only the Null Signal Games card pool. 17 influence and ability to redirect runs. Makes these run events, things like Dirty Laundry, a bit more tricky, but we're just checking archives there, getting 3 credits, not seeing any cards. Just to click for 3 is maybe good enough.
Oh, look, and I was actually, Chris getting his cast called by his Antoine. Very generous to let him take that down. I think
that's pretty normal for Netrunner players. I know this is a casual tier tournament technically, but you'd love to see that sort of sporting behavior.
Yeah, no, it's always great to see. And you know, the money is going to come in one way or the other. I think this is, you know, once again, Chris has to decide, is this now the Rashida that was drawn? You know, because there was not an install in advance, there's a smaller range of threats, but Rashida is a very real threat that Chris needs to decide. Does he want to burn some of his 8 credits to make Antoine spend some of his 8 credits, or just try and do a little bit more setup and econ? It looks like Chris is opting to go for more econ, saying a Rashida fire is probably okay for me. Turns out it's not a Rashida, so comes up very nicely out of that.
Yeah, no res. So we're assuming it's just another Lacosta waiting there cooking. If we have that Charlotte again, you probably do install advanced sooner than that. Whether it's an Anoetic, you think it's safer behind 2 ice, and 2 ice can be a bit tricky. Kit only code gatifies the first ice, so if you do have a sentry in the back, it's not your favorite server. You generally want a couple end the runs on the remote server, but if it is a Sai Santan, there is technically some threat there. As much as Antoine's only on 8 credits, that's not a lot. That can be spread pretty thin unless you start colliding with Tattoo Bolas.
Yeah, I think Chris really wants to start applying pressure to centrals if possible here. I think that's one of the interesting things is like when you're in these board states as the runner, you want to have tools to apply pressure right now to put the corp in awkward positions. Yeah. But a lot of people, I think, correctly build their runner decks to kind of say, oh, I'm going to just stay back and stay in control. And so you don't see these like big blowout like plays that are even really possible. The only blowouts here for Chris are probably something like a trick shot or I
think Burner's the big one.
Yeah, but I think I don't remember if the list had more than one. I guess it probably did have 2.
I think it was 3. I think we see one in his right under his right thumb there.
You're totally right.
I think Chris showed up with so much HQ pressure in this deck, and I love it because people don't respect that. And it's just like, oh, I survived the 1 burner, but the 2nd burner, let alone the 3rd burner, DJ Steve comes down, he could be burning 4 or 5 times a game, and that is just a massive amount of tempo backwards. Now, this remote server, we're expecting Lacosta to Charlotte, which is a pretty good engine if you can't contest here, but 8 credits, we'll see. We can res just about any ice in the format on HQ, whether we want to start taxing at the lobby. Let's see how great it is. Tattoo Bola, probably one of your best options there.
All right, so Chris is choosing to break with the Lobi. Sometimes into the Tattoo Bola, I think it's correct to actually bounce off, let the corp actually lose money on resing it, and you say, yeah, you know, it's an exchange that works out. But when you're making a run event occur, I think that is a pretty reasonable way to say, no, it is worth the money here. Chris did miss his Mystic Miami trigger. I've been warned in advance that we get to make fun of Chris for missing a lot of triggers, so we will see which ones I can catch throughout the course of this game.
He's choosing not to use it. Let's say that.
Yeah. He's making the intentional choice to leave a Mystic credit,
We'll see if he uses. He might actually come back and use it. He might be reminded, but we're getting an HQ. Notably also, wow, we see a Nisei Mark II in there, a Tattoo Bola swap back, no surprise, and a Virus. It was an option there if you want to trade the ice. You can just send the burner into archives by using the AgInfusion. Now you'll have an open HQ, and at this point in the game, you're expecting the corporation to have at least one agenda in hand. So it's really important to see where this Nisei goes. Virus is going to go on top, Nisei on top of that. And now with the Lobisomu, you can just run R&D. Now, a Sentry might upset you, and Anansi will definitely protect the agenda, but we'll see if Chris just says, I'm going to send it and assume that it's a code gate or a barrier. Looks like actually just passing the turn, throwing out a test run. There's going to be a Nisei in hand.
Interesting. I almost wonder if you would put the Nisei below the Virus there, just to force a click out of the corp. Though I guess if he reads that as a Charlotte in the remote, then he would kind of just say go. It looks like that's not the case.
A Spin Doctor was to disrupt those play lines regardless, so we now know the Nisei's in hand. We now know the Lacosta's in hand as well. But on top of an upgrade, you're assuming it's another Lacosta unless Antoine wants to get an Anoetic Void in there and just keep it safe. The one defensive upgrade we're expecting. I need to mention, there's a little bird there on top of the AgInfusion, and that is Maddie's, our participation prize this year. We gave out these crocheted plushie Banhar tokens that Maddie lovingly crocheted all of these. And Antoine used it the whole day. I don't think he was playing Banhar, but just to use it as that once per turn trigger on the AgInfusion. So if that bird flies away, we know AgInfusion has been sated for the turn.
Yep. Now, I think Antoine read Spin Doctor and then clicked to Drew and then played a hedge fund. I think felt like at his prior credit totals, he did not have enough to make real pushes. But I think, probably wanted to clear agendas out of hand. And I suspect that's what's happening with the Spin Doctor, though we don't quite get to see well enough to know for sure. But
yeah, two face downs. You're assuming those are both agendas. The other options are hedge fund and Lacosta, and both of those are relatively important. So he might have just, as you said, fixed his hand. We might assume only one agenda in hand, but there's a chance there's nothing, and he's just going to slow down a bit, find more defensive upgrades, more ice, and more money.
Yeah. And meanwhile, Chris is going to say, well, if you're not going to do anything, I won't do anything back. And just keeps building up, has an economic parity with the corp, which often, especially with a breaker as efficient as Lobisoum, is a very nice position for him to be in.
He wants the cut, asking for the cut again. You're meant to always offer a shuffle or cut to your opponent. I like the cut. I like to have a feel like I can control my fate.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Now, barring like the explosivity of cards that we're expecting, things like Trick Shot, and we've seen two burners so far, this might be a bit more of a, I'm going to say, Euro-centric board game of a Netrunner card game, where both players are just trying to make the most efficient turns. And on Chris's side, he has a lot more things to do once per turn. He wants to fire the Onicom. He wants to play an event if he can for Mystic. If he can charge his Lobi cheaply, he'll consider it, but not a huge reason here to make single accesses. R&D, probably a bit expensive. HQ, you're not expecting there to be agendas in there, so he's happy setting up daily casts, getting some card draw, and just waiting till he can find his Orca, which will hopefully be a next spark of inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things that I think separates the really good players from the good players. I'm here just trying to get pokes in. And when the corp's at 15 credits, that poke is probably coming out poorly for me as the runner here. And so just saying, no, there's not a threat. I'm going to set up. I'm going to make sure that I have, Chris feels like he's going to have the tools to challenge a remote. And it's a long ways before the corp can make something that actually stops him, which is interesting because he only has the one breaker on the board. So I'll be interested to see how well that manifests out. And we now see every single server iced here. Want to turn off those dirty laundries, maybe, which is a little bit surprising.
Subliminal messaging, I think.
Yeah,
I think the subliminal messaging got played last turn, and if you want to disincentivize that run, it's also nice, right? Like this means you can play around pinhole threading if you ice up everything with AgInfusion.
That's true. Yeah, that's that's probably actually the relevant and quite important thing here. Turning off pinhole threading is a very big part of the matchup. You kind of have to force the runner to suddenly have two pinhole threadings to deal with your void. And that does actually, to me, suggest that that's what the upgrade is in the remote, is probably a void over a Lacosta. Though it certainly could be the Lacosta. It just is, a habit of a lot of Netrunner players. And very good AgInfusion players won't have this tell. But if you're an AgInfusion player of my level of caliber, you'll remember that you should protect the Anoetic Void, when you put it down on the table and not before then. So
yeah, you're expecting it is still closed deck list. I think you're expecting, as much as Kit only has 10 influence with an Onicom deck, those Pinhole threadings feel pretty good. And Spark of Inspiration, mind you, getting a 10 credit program, the most expensive program in the entire format, down for just 3 credits. It's an Orca. We did see a bit of Chris's deck there. No big surprises. This sort of archetype is pretty well tread at this point in the season. But now we're breaking all the sentries for no more than 4 credits, unless I think we run into... What gets this? Like,
I think
Cloud Eater for 6 is the worst?
Yeah, I think Cloud Eater is 6, right? Because Orca's
I think
plus...
it's 2 for 3.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
I think you need like a tier for 6 or something like that.
Yeah, because Trebuchet is also only 6, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's going to be good. And mind you, we still have the Lobisomia for barriers or code gates, and now something in the remote server. We'll see what that upgrade is. If it's a La Costa into a 4-2, that could be an early Anise Mark II. We saw the 4-2s in the list. And we have our breakers. We have 19 credits. We're expecting overclocks and trick shots. So there's a lot of ways to get suddenly more money while interacting now. Yeah. AgInfusion has a nice way of dealing with these things, but there you go. There's the third burner. I would not expect the third burner.
Yeah, the third burner definitely feels like a surprise here, and especially if this is an Anoetic Void to protect what's in the remote. Though it's with the no advance, it reads more like a La Costa to me. Antoine now has to make the decision. Does he use this AgInfusion ability to turn off the runner's game plan? And
considering it, and there's the text. There's a lot to read, but we're going to be trashing a Thimble Rig on HQ. Now we have an open HQ. And the fact that this was burnered, you know that there's something good in hand. Either it's the Anoetic Respect, or there's just agendas in there. And with only, I think, 4 cards in hand, you know with the burner, you're going to basically brute force your way to finding an agenda.
Yep. Okay, we're seeing just it looks like click 2 run. It looked like there was a trick shot in hand, but Chris says, I want to go and see what's here first. So going to use Lobisomia. You end kit to paint it so Lobisomia actually gains a counter rather than has to lose one to break a barrier. Antoine is making a swap decision. Very nice little +2 credit ice card, a very strong champ card. And run will continue.
There's the border control we expected by this point. We did see that one early. That is going to be Lobisomia counters. I was just going to say with the burner, getting like cards out of hand or ice out of hand does make the Tattoo Bulls a fair bit worse, but this server, you notice how he stacked 3 barriers in a row is exactly what you want against Lobisomia. That's a very well-structured server to deal with this 2 breaker pair.
Yeah, for sure. So Chris is going to go and break the brand. Antoine now needs to decide, does he use a defensive upgrade? Does he use the border control, or does he let Chris in? It sounds like he's going to let Chris in. It is only a Rashida and a La Costa to boot. It looks like La Costa goes as well, though I guess we'll see once these cards
trashing everything, yes.
Yeah. I think
down to 6 credits.
Yeah, down to 6 credits. Corp is also only on 7, and I think this runner deck in particular has a ton of burst econ recovery. So I'm not surprised that this is a decision that Chris made. Trashing La Costa just closes the threat range of this AgInfusion so significantly.
Very notably, too, is what the ice placement is. A lot of times in this deck, you want to go out of your way to structure your ice so that you have outermost rezzed ice, specifically on a server, so that if you redirect someone with the AgInfusion, they have to basically break the Anansi. They have to click through the Brawn, and you can force those ugly interactions. Now, this is not currently rezzed ice that's going to be a problem where you have to worry about the face checks. If AgInfusion fires, it's just going to waste one of your clicks. And HQ wide open. If there's an agenda, it probably goes on that remote server. That remote server, you can force through the Brawn twice. That's 10 credits. Hedge fund, install advance. I'm assuming that's our first agenda looking for a Nisei. Otherwise, Charlotte could be a possibility, but I think if you have an agenda, it goes in the remote server, you don't keep it in HQ.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense based on this board state. And I think now Chris needs to decide how he can best apply some pressure here. He does have enough counters to go in twice if he needs to. Because he'll go up +1 counter breaking the border control, -1 going on the brand, and then could go back on the brand after a border control. But just trick shot coming in. Looks like Chris is going to C2.
No res. Then Baruch off the top. That's the second copy we've seen so far into another border control. I think there's a big chance this remote server is just barriers. It might be a tattoo for tattoo swap.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, you're going to start to run into problems with Lobisomia. And we have 6 credits. So if we do break Brawn and border control, you technically can do it with just house money, but we'll see if you can force out the border control sooner than later. Brawn is probably the most taxing ice in the deck. So forcing the border control to double the value of that is important. Oh, Anansi.
Oh.
Only 4 credits to break.
I actually wonder. That Anansi res almost feels like a bit of a mistake to me, because it actually reinforces the Lobisomia here. making it go a little bit further. I guess the Lobosome could have broken the Anansi instead, and it is in fact cheaper with the Orca, but
Yep. Yeah, lower card, mind you, does charge the first time it fully breaks a sentry. And so now here, if we want to use the border control, which I think Antoine is kind of basic, there's a chance with the Nancy Res, he's committing to force Chris through this server twice in a row. He does have a good server, but it looks like border control, just trashing that to end the run, another world champion card. Chris Dyer, we're going to get that card draw off the Onicom. If you want to come back here, it's going to be 9 credits.
It's actually really important here that Chris did not because he used the Orca rather than the Lobosome to break the Anansi, he's now short a counter to break the Bran a second time. And so wait, why is that?
Well, I don't think it matters, right? Because if you break with the Orca, you get a charge. If you break with the Lobi, you get a charge.
Yeah, you're right. It's the same either way.
Yeah. So the Orca just saves you a credit if you use it. Now, very notably, you can't charge a card that doesn't have counters on it, but Lobi's text does not charge itself. It adds a power counter. So if the Lobi empties barrier counters, those power counters, you can just build it back. It just won't be this turn. Now, down to 2 credit, Antoine is not threatening to score out. The best case scenario financially for him would for that to be a Charlotte, but using the border control does not make us think it's a Charlotte. It looks like a Nisei, and he's 1 credit short. We know he's not top decking a Subliminal. If he has one in hand, he can maybe score out, but that is going to be an awkward turn with an agenda clearly sitting in the remote server, and you don't want to continue to advance it.
Yeah, and Chris is even sitting on just a ton of credits coming in. The Diesel into Creative Commission and like Daily Cast Creative Commission was such a big both players have invested a lot, but Chris is already almost back up to his high point in credit totals. Antoine is sitting at only 4. So Chris, and it looks like Chris has another trick shot in hand. I feel like this is maybe not the turn you go and use it, but it's definitely a consideration because it would let you get into that remote for almost free.
12 credits support. There's an upgrade on top of that. Now, I'm not sure if we've seen it in a Locosta. I think we might have seen a Locosta there. Otherwise, if it's an Anoetic, it's pretty expensive. With only 3 cards in hand and only 4 credits, you need a bit more to score that out. So there's still a threat, and I love these upgrade threats. I think we've seen a Mavirus, actually. This is a chance this is just the Mavirus as a bluff, which is an interesting thing to see how Chris respects the chance that there could be a defensive upgrade in the remote server.
Yeah, I think it's, from Chris's perspective, if this is an Anoetic Void, even just running once would keep Antoine off of scoring again.
Yeah, for sure.
But
and put him on an ugly spot of cards in hand, which is, you're happy with that.
Yeah, for sure. I think as Chris, you want to find a way to force this, but it looks like we see a prepaid voice pad coming down. Some old school 2014 tech called, wanted its meta back. We see a Miss Bones installed, which I think is pretty interesting given that 2 Lacostas are already trashed here. I feel like that's basically all of the trash costs that are going to be installed in this deck. But we'll see if Chris can make it work. We see a Pinhole Threading coming in on HQ.
For free, mind you, off the prepaid, so we're going to touch the new card, and it is actually just the Mavirus. I think there's a chance with the Miss Bones we're expecting to pay at least 1, let alone 4 credits if it is another Lacosta. But that means if we do not challenge this, it looks like Antoine can go down to 1 credit scoring on a Nisei. I think Chris is letting this happen. I think he assumed that was a defensive upgrade or a Lacosta. If he trashed a Lacosta, it would take a turn off. But Nisei Mark II, down to 1 credit, such a powerful ability, using that agenda counter at any paid ability window after you run all that ice, after you deal with AgInfusion. That is a way you can claw back. But Antoine definitely has to claw back here, down on only 1 credit, leading on 2 points.
Yeah, Chris definitely is in a world where he can just start taking singles to win kind of thing and keep his economic advantage. And we're going to see a +7 credit sure gamble here, which feels...
And a card draw. It's so good.
Yeah, that's a lot of value for a single click here. So
now he has some issues. He needs to start breaking ice to charge the Lobisomia, but here he's looking for some pressure. Whether it's the trick shot, top of R&D is unknown. You don't want to spend that unless you're running the remote server as well. So we need a pressure card. I was going to say either Cataloger, but DJ Steve with an open HQ is a fantastic way to get more value out of this event-based economy. Are we getting a burner back here or what?
I think it's got to be a burner, right? Just show 2 burners.
I hope so.
Keep the tempo completely 0. It looks like maybe Chris is just saying, money. I can out money you, and I'm just going to beat you over the head with a wallet. You're on 1, I'm on 14, soon to be 18. And let's just keep this train rolling. Seeing a Thimble Rig out of HQ. I actually think a thimble rig is a pretty reasonable res here for Antoine, just to allow him to reposition the brand relative to the last unres ice on that remote. I think that's one of the big ways he could win is by if he can set that up so that he has an AgInfusion boop behind a brand, he'll suddenly have 2 and then runs on a remote, which starts being some real click pressure on the runner.
Chris counting out the deck there. I think he's down to just 7 cards. Might have been 6. I missed the count itself, but he doesn't have that many things left. So you're expecting a cataloger. You're expecting every single trick shot so far, but that's Steve Cambridge coming down on this board state on 1 credit. Antoine definitely needs to push stuff in the remote server here to force the issue turn after turn after turn. I think worst case here for the runner is a Rashida, which Antoine would really appreciate getting 3 cards, and at least 3 credits is most important here, but HQ wide open. I'd love to see a burner. We have an overclock in hand, and we're just going to trick shot, going to challenge both servers, going to charge a Lobisomu, and probably not even pay that many real credits for the privilege.
Yeah, the thing I like about the trick shot this turn is this is now 2 fresh cards in R&D, so Chris maximizing the number of access he gets rather than using the trick shot on back-to-back turns, which may have let him actually go after the Nisei, but instead chose to value the access, gets the Nisei Mark II here off the top of R&D. Mystic gains a credit, and now Chris is probably going to go after the remote here.
Yes.
And this lets him get
now we can
a counter back on the Lobi.
Yeah, he has to use a Lobi, which is only 1 credit more. I think he's using the Orca here, but if he uses the Orca, he can't actually charge his Lobisomu. We'll see if that's important. He might rewind this. Yeah, I think he's realizing here that he's going to go for the Lobi, which is a bit unintuitive. Charge, mind you, has some conditions based off of it. So there's a bunch of cards that add power counters that don't use the charge text itself, and Lobi is definitely one of those. So we're going to pay 5 to break. Mind you, use Kit's ability. 5 more for the Brawn itself. So we're going to lose that counter as fast as we gained it. But we're going to see what's in this remote server and probably trash something for free with the Miss Bones. Oh, and it was a Rashida almost sneaking through there.
And then Swan being a great sport here, saying, hey, use the Miss Bones, not the credit from your credit pool. And a cam draw here for Chris. Still 11 credits, not, breaking that brand to just, it feels weird to say just trashing a Rashida, but it is kind of like, man, he would have really loved to have found an agenda there. He's going to take his Steve trigger here. Now is maybe a good time to grab some burners, and it looks like that's what Chris is going for. I'm guessing next turn will look something like click 1 burner HQ, recurring some econ. Chris is going to... just access a single card. I was like, I was already on the step of resolving a burner. Yeah.
So this is a really comfortable spot. Well, there you go. There's a burner coming back. We know one of the cards coming back, just Niseiing it, saying, I'm going to trade that. I don't want to get burnered. What does that mean? Does he have something in hand? Does he just not want to lose that tempo, but using one of his most valuable resources just to stop that burner? Not that HQ, you can't return another burner next turn off of a Steve coming back.
Yeah, that's a very interesting Nisei Mark II use. And it's
he must have an agenda in hand, and a big one.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing though is like I feel like if a bacteria gets scored here, that's actually one of Antoine's ways, like kind of back into this game, because it gives him so much control over R&D. But instead, double icing on HQ, I think it's an interesting one because the only ice he's actually threatening to res is a thimble rig here, which does actually pose some challenges, though he might swap the thimble rig for a brand to prevent runbacks, which does seem like a potentially nice line here.
Bacterial programming is such a powerful card. Ooh, cataloger's coming down. Now you can charge that near infinitely with the Orca if you're just running through those sentries. Now you might need to charge the Lobi, but we're gonna be looking at top 4. We have no shuffle effects here, so we find an agenda. You mentioned it, bacterial programming is the 1/5/3 that genuinely I'm not sure if we want to steal as the runner. Gonna throw us into the Anansi. Use that Lobi ability. Trying to figure out what to break. It's 5 for Lobi, and we're gonna use that just so we can get a counter. Mind you, it is a code gate. It's the first dice that we've encountered this turn.
Yep, and I'm assuming after that, Chris is going to jack out. The interesting thing about Cataloger, unlike indexing, because it's not a run event, Chris can just spend another click to make a run at R&D.
Yeah, it doesn't use a counter until you get a successful run?
Yeah, that's correct. So...
wild.
Yeah.
We're just going to go back. So we traded a click for a click. Now we're going to look at the top 4. That's what Cataloger does. And Chris can rearrange them and put them back. We see... a bit of cards there. I think that might be a sprint. under his right thumb. I can't see too many of the others, but deciding what to go back there, yeah, definitely a sprint there, which is notice asking for cards in hand. We do think there's an agenda in HQ and that double ice, which at this point I think Tattoo Bowl is the best ice on HQ to both tax and low beat counters and get Antoine back in the game financially. But returning 4, check the sleeve side. I always check the sleeve side when I put it back. It looks so strange, but you need to know which side they're on. It doesn't look good. It looks like you're marking cards.
That's fair. That's fair. And it looks like we're gonna actually overclock HQ here. I'm guessing this is gonna. You were right. I was thinking this is going to be a little rig, but Tattoo Bowl is an obvious res here. And actually, for Chris, I wonder if this isn't just a bounce off, and that is what it looks like is going to happen here. Just saying, yeah, you can spend credits to defend HQ. You can turn off my Steve, but I'm going to deny you any credit total for the rest of the game potentially here.
And no R&D run back is super telling. I'm assuming there's no agendas there immediately. And on 1 credit, there's not much Antoine can do. He's definitely found himself between a rock and a hard spot. But now we know the next 3 turns, unless Antoine draws, there's probably only the 1 agenda we're assuming in HQ. And if that's the case, I think both players can just like set up a bit. And we have that Trickster Taka. We are still running HQ. Now we can get a cheap counter on the Lobby Soma. We're going to flip one of those cards in hand. We're assuming we're still working on that double tattoo swap. No res on the innermost. 7 credits is a lot of money, but sometimes you want to just keep an ice face down. Oh, actually, it looks like we're just premeditating, giving a bit of information on what we want with the Steve, but it is just, it's tattoos all the way down. So much money.
Yep, showing a hedge and another tattoo swap. Suddenly, Antoine is back in it with the money.
Yep.
And Chris is going to take a single here saying there's probably an agenda. And there it is, the bacterial fire. So a lot of credits going on to Chris's companions here. Antoine now has to take a big think, has to plan out potentially up to the next 7 turns of the game. This is one of the reasons that Bacterial is kind of famous for causing these big, long things. Because
it's the sandwich maker. As a good break. Everyone go stretch your legs.
Yeah. As the AgInfusion player, you really like to play this card well. You want to think through your next 21 clicks effectively that you want to take. And when you want to make R&D vulnerable or not vulnerable. And this Bacterial is actually really nice into the cataloger. One option here for Antoine, who looks like he's adding a bunch of cards to his hand, is to take that sprint and shuffle away any agendas that were in that 7. Especially because it looked like he was drawing 4 or 5 cards there. Maybe actually trying to take some tempo here, because this remote that he's built is quite difficult to break into. 5.
Yes.
And Chris is not presenting that much money on the table right now.
We know there's a Bordic draw, I'm pretty sure, in HQ. So you add that to the remote server. You have still the AgInfusion ability. You're going to need another ice for that. That can be quite a taxing remote server. But yeah, how this like pairs off against the cataloger is fascinating. Now we're returning. Did you see how many cards went back on top of R&D?
It looked like somewhere on the order of like 3 to 4 cards were drawn, and I assume the rest went back onto R&D.
Okay. So 1 cataloger's worth of safety potentially.
That is my read of it, is we're somewhere around a cataloger's worth of safety. And another sure gamble for 7 off of a freshly loaded Mystic. And the Trickster Taka, honestly, is also going to be very nice value for Chris as this game goes on and his deck runs out. Just dripping once a turn and then drawing 2 more times. Probably looking to get a couple more of these burst run events like Trick Shot or Burner.
I think as we get closer to time, mind you, these are 40-minute single-sided rounds. We're about 35 minutes into the round, so players are going to play a lot faster. I think Chris missed the prepaid credit there, so there's going to be a lot of these like once per turn triggers. It's hard to keep track of them when you're playing at this speed. But install Advance here, we still haven't seen a Charlotte. That was a card added to hand, assumedly off of the Bacterial. So whether it's an agenda, you're assuming it's border control into Nancy into Braun, and whether you can deal with that potentially twice, or even just like AgInfusion and the run back now. We're expecting 1 more trick shot if we're counting. If you run HQ, you can force a trick shot back into your hand, but Chris is on a game point. He just needs to get 1 good access. So definitely the remote server is looking a bit tricky. We're running HQ as a start. We're assuming the innermost is a Tattoo Bowl. The outermost could be something nice and cheap.
Yeah, it looks like no res. Here comes the Tattoo Bowl. I think Chris will presumably charge up his Lobby here, because otherwise he loses his use of the kit ability.
Yeah.
Taking the single here on HQ, It's a little bit of an odd
I
priority.
don't think there's an agenda in there.
Yeah.
I think he just wants to see, oh, he's bouncing. So saying, I'm not giving you 4 credits, which makes sense if he wants to charge the remote server, because then border control drops you to not enough credits to res. So we're just going to AgInfusion. This, mind you, is the cataloger, and Antoine knows how many cards we're going to see here. We're going to see, I think, 1 new card, if we're not mistaken, breaking the 7 lock, and cataloger's leaving. It's not coming back, so Orca's not going to charge it infinitely.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm a little surprised that Chris did not actually just break that Anansi, spend 4 credits to basically get another hit at this indexing trigger. But I guess maybe he might have a second cataloger here. I'm not 100% sure.
Ooh, trick shot off the top. That's a spin doctor again. I don't think there's any engine.
And another spin doctor.
2 spin doctors. And now we still have a lot of credits to run the remote server with. We're not running the remote server, just letting that fire. It's just a Charlotte. All right. That was a wild turn. Mind you, the HQ bounce. Charlotte is now digging deeper and deeper. R&D has fresh cards. We trashed 2, drew 2 off mandatory in Charlotte. We're going to start with that sprint, which was just kind of the can kick down the road, and now we're very much breaking R&D lock here.
Yeah. So Antoine, sprint, a card that's seen lesser play, but is definitely seeing a decent amount in this AgInfusion. I think it actually is a very nice little role player in this deck.
Yeah.
Is draw 3, shuffle back 2, so net completely neutral on cards, but lets you move cards around between zones. So you've got some real options here.
Now, R&D definitely a weak server. Tattoo Bull, you can get in there if there's any specific card you need. We're assuming now that Chris has his whole deck. If he has a second pinhole threading, that means technically he has 3 pinhole threadings. If you want a Steve to force the next one back, but install on top of Charlotte, assumedly a Lacosta or an Anoetic, we know it has to be an upgrade of sorts. And coming up on time here is actually Antoine who has work to do. If time is called, active player finishes their turn, your opponent gets 1 more turn, and then whoever is higher on points, they get a full win. And time is definitely sneaking up. There's probably about 5 minutes left in the round is my guess.
Yeah, and this is a difficult board state for Antoine. You have a very expensive server. You just have to make sure that it is expensive enough, because if you're off by even just a couple of credits, it becomes quite reasonable for Chris to go in. The other thing is the Anansi, while scary, is not that good of an end the run on the remote. It can fire. Oh, and that's just an Nisei Mark II off the top. After working all of that up, it's just the game. Chris, I think, playing a very dominant game here, carefully controlling both. Though it's not like Antoine did not fight back very hard and make a lot of very smart decisions as well.
I was talking to Chris after that game, and he was mentioning so many barriers was really slowing him down. The way that he interacted cautiously, and I think in a really very forward-thinking way with those tattoo bulls, understanding like, you rezzing this now, I know I could break it cheaply, I know I could charge my lobby, I know I could get this overclock, but just saying you spending 2 is enough, I'm going to walk away. It's really cool to see. Really interesting play patterns in these 2 matchups. Now, Chris, we're not going to see on camera again for the NANPC circuit, but Antoine had a fantastic finish here. He actually ended up 9th place in Swiss. And luckily for Antoine, the 8th player in our Swiss cut could not return the second day. So Antoine got to take their seat and managed to play in the finals. So I think we're going to see a bit more of Antoine playing up to come in the top cut. Great game, Mudgy. Just round 3. We have 4 more rounds of Swiss for NANPC Montreal. Jeff, thanks so much for joining me. You want to shout out your channel real quick?
Yeah, people can check me out. I mostly stream these days on YouTube and Twitch at YezendernSC. But I am ever hoping to get back to making more produced content, as it's stuff I really love to do. So keep an eye out for that. And also come out to Worlds if you're not currently planning on it. It is always a wonderful time. It is October 18th through 20th in San Francisco.
Yeah, I'll be there. It's going to be a fantastic event. And thanks so much for watching. We'll be back in just a bit with more coverage in NANPC Montreal. Hey, thanks so much for watching. As you saw there, at the end of the video, we threw up on screen a whole bunch of the prize support that Null Signal Games is providing for the 2024 World Championship in San Francisco. I was only 4.5 weeks away. It's sneaking up on us really quickly, and I just want to take a second to re-emphasize this point. If you're a newer player to Netrunner, maybe you've been to no tournaments, maybe you've been to a couple local tournaments, I would consider coming to the World Championship. For a lot of folks, that name, that title sounds really daunting. It seems like an incredibly competitive place that's maybe not for the casual player. But I promise you, for most people, mind you, the hundreds of people who come in for the World Championship from all over the globe, the majority of them are not there to win the World Championship title. The majority of them are there just to hang out and just to have a fantastic weekend with all these nice folks that understand how great of a game Netrunner is. I think it's often easier to think of the World Championship more like Netrunner Con 2024, because that's kind of the vibe you get. a weekend-long event where there's dinners, there's side events, there's all these fun tournaments going on. And yeah, one person will be crowned the World Championship, but just about everyone there is a winner because they have a fantastic weekend. This happens once a year, and it's just the greatest thing. So if you're a newer player and you're considering coming down to the World Championship, I cannot recommend it enough. If you have any questions, please hit me up in the comments below and we'll get back to you. I know these sort of things can be daunting, but that first step is so important for you to understand how great organized play is in Netrunner. Again, I want to give a huge thank you to all these names here and more. These are just the Sure Gamble and the Degree Mill patrons. We have a lot of daily cast patrons too that help support the Metropole Grid. This sort of stuff takes a lot of time. We're ripping through the NANPC footage. We're streaming twice a week. There's a lot of stuff going on the Metropole Grid, and it just simply would not be possible without all these names here and more. So if you want to help support the Metropole Grid, you can find the link in the description to Patreon. Any amount of contribution is incredibly appreciated. And of course, a huge thank you to Jeff, DSingrenSC. You can find the link to his channel in the comments below. I'm a big fan. He streams Tuesday evenings after we finish our Tuesday afternoon stream. So go over there, give a like, drop into chat, and say hi. He's some really good video content on there as well. And with that, we'll be back on Tuesday with some streams, Thursday with some streams, and back on a Saturday morning with more NANPC. Thanks for watching. Ciao.